On May 17, 1876, we began a march that would later be seen as a deeply unfortunate expedition. Our column moved toward the Yellowstone River. Having covered a distance of 12 miles, we established a camp along the Big Heart River, where we paused to survey the area. By approximately June 10th, we had progressed to the Powder River. From the 12 companies present, a detachment of 6 was sent out on a scouting detail. After leaving our wagons at the Powder River, we loaded 10 days of supplies onto pack mules and journeyed for 2 days upriver. Shifting course toward the Tongue River, we later discovered a Native American trail beside the Rosebud River. As dusk approached, we made coffee and then spent the full night following that path. At daybreak, after brewing more coffee, we continued our advance along the trail until noon. The commander of our detachment, General Reno, decided to turn back down the Rosebud River once it became clear our 10-day rations were dwindling. At the point where the Rosebud meets the Yellowstone, we met with the other 6 companies of our regiment, led by General Custer. Also present was the department commander, General Terry. They had placed General Custer under arrest. This was said to be due to his opposition to the post traders who held contracts at various forts. Those contracts had been canceled after scandals involving post-trader ships during President Grant's term. It was impossible to buy any goods at the post without going through these merchants. A single glass of liquor cost 25 cents, and these were typically served as very modest portions of whiskey. Sergeant Daniel Kanipe of the U.S. Army served with Company C of the 7th Cavalry Regiment at the Battle of Little Bighorn on June 25, 1876. He played a central role in the engagement and is remembered for his courage and his direct account of the battle, being one of its rare survivors. His statements were vital during the official court of inquiry into the events, where he gave key evidence concerning Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer and the actions of the 7th Cavalry. Kanipe continued his military service after the war and later wrote a memoir detailing his experiences at Little Bighorn. This account, known as the Kanipe story, is considered an essential historical document for understanding the battle. Due to his valor and dedication to service during the Battle of Little Bighorn, Sergeant Daniel Kanipe remains an important personage in the annals of American military history. The arrest of Custer stemmed from his decision to set a ceiling on prices. However, he was not alone, as other high-ranking Army officers were with him, and he was given a leadership role at the previously mentioned site. On July 22nd, his unit obtained a 15-day supply of provisions from the river steamer Far West. Custer had in his possession 2 Gatling guns and 2 Rodman cannons. He turned these over to General Gibbon, who had them ferried across the river, as Custer felt he could manage without them. We now view this as an error in judgment, for had he retained just one of those Rodman guns and fired a single shot, the native forces would not have ceased their retreat. Most certainly not. They would be fleeing still, and I would not be the sole survivor from our company if a Gatling gun had been present. In truth, the event known as Custer's Massacre might never have occurred. We struck camp and marched throughout the entire day on June 22nd. That evening, Custer directed that orders be communicated by hand signals alone, that bugle calls would cease, and that fires would be permitted only for brewing coffee. We commenced our march again on the morning of June 23rd. After a march lasting nearly until sunset, we camped and set out once more the next morning, June 24th. That day we reached a site where the Indians had held not only a sun dance, but also a war dance. The ground was hard and level from their dancing, and they had built shelters from brush and cottonwood branches. Among our party were 6 Crow Indian scouts who discovered the scalp of a white soldier from Gibbon's command. The scalp was hanging from a willow branch. These Crow, who held a deep animosity for the Sioux we pursued, were overjoyed at the sight. They erupted into a frenzy, whooping, dancing, and shouting. What were they hoping to find? Had they encountered a Sioux warrior there, it would have been a terrible day for him. Such was the intensity of their fury. The scalp was brought to General Custer, who inspected it before handing it over to the troops. It was later carried in the saddlebags of my company's most senior line sergeant, Sergeant Finley, until the time of his death. We continued our advance throughout the entire day of June 24th. Around 10 o'clock that night, the Indian scouts who had been sent ahead earlier returned. It was dark by then, though in that region during summer it remains light enough to read until about 9 o'clock. We received orders that evening to pack our gear and prepare our horses. We marched overnight, drawing near to the junction of the Little Bighorn and Rosebud rivers. General Custer then led the regiment into a ravine, which seemed an ideal place for us to remain concealed indefinitely. However, as we entered the area at a brisk trot and gallop, the pack train under Quartermaster Sergeant Hurst had lost part of its hardtack supply. Upon being informed, General Custer directed the sergeant to go back and retrieve the bread. When the sergeant reached the spot where it had fallen, he found 2 Indians helping themselves to the rations. They took flight upon seeing the military detail approaching. After his return to camp and his report of the encounter, General Custer ordered us to saddle up immediately. My assumption was that he planned to surprise the Indians at dawn, but since they now knew we were in the vicinity, he decided to move at once. We advanced up the divide and then came to a halt. General Custer departed with 2 scouts and the head trumpeter, Henry Voss, for a period of 2 hours. When he returned, he divided the regiment into 3 separate detachments. 3 troops, A, M, and G, were placed under Major Reno. Captain Benteen was given command of 3 troops as well, H, K, and D. Captain McDougal was assigned to lead the pack train, accompanied by Troop B. General Custer kept 4 troops for his own command, C, E, I, and F. We then moved out from that location. Major Reno was positioned to the left of General Custer, with Captain Benteen farther to the left. The intent to assault the Indian camp from 3 distinct directions was clear. Captain McDougal's orders were to bring the pack train up along the main Indian trail. We proceeded down what is now called Benteen's Creek until we reached a crossing, where we came upon an abandoned Indian camp. Their fires were still smoking. Inside one standing teepee was the body of a deceased Indian. General Custer issued the command to set the teepee ablaze. Upon Major Reno's arrival, he was directed to ford Benteen Creek, which he proceeded to do. With 3 companies, General Custer advanced downstream. We were within a quarter mile of the confluence of Benteen's Creek and the Little Bighorn when I observed Indians on the bluffs above the river. I notified First Sergeant Bobo of their presence. At that moment, General Custer also glanced upward, and Troops C, I, and F proceeded toward the heights where the Indians had been seen. My unit, Troop C, was commanded by the General's brother, Captain Tom Custer. We rode vigorously, yet upon gaining the summit, the Indians had disappeared. However, teepees were visible for kilometers in every direction. The Crow Indian scouts attached to our command planned to stealthily descend and capture several ponies. A few attempted to slip down, but were fired upon for their efforts. Bloody Knife Reeve, a Ree or Urucara, Curly, a Crow, and Chief Scout Mitch Buey stayed with us on the bluffs. Once the men from those 4 companies began shouting upon sighting the Indian camp in the valley below, we charged to the far end of the bluffs to position for an attack. Sergeant Finkel was riding adjacent to me. We were both near Captain Tom Custer. Finkel shouted to me that he was nearly spent. His horse was faltering. I called back, "Finkel, come on if you can." He dropped back slightly. The captain then ordered me to turn back and find McDougal with the pack train to deliver fresh orders from General Custer. He stated, "Tell McDougal to bring the pack train straight to the high ground. If packs come loose, don't stop to fix them. Cut them off. Be quick about it. There's a big Indian camp." I turned my horse. What I first thought was ill fortune ultimately spared my life. Had Sergeant Finkel not fallen back minutes before, he would have received the orders, and I would not be here to tell this. In the distance, I could see the dust from the pack train like a small cloud. I rode toward it as my troop and the others continued descending toward the Indian encampment. I recall General Custer's final words. We were all at a full gallop, giving 3 cheers for the soldiers as they went up the hill. Some, with horses unchecked, raced past General Custer. "Hold your horses, boys," he yelled after them. "There are plenty down there for all of us." I rode back after they went on. Having conveyed the orders to Captain McDougall with the pack train, I then made my way to Captain Benteen, as my instructions required me to deliver them to him also. Major Reno was falling back from the base of the bluffs when McDougall and his men ascended the hilltop to reinforce his position. From behind them came the shouts and gunfire of the Indians. Men were falling on all sides. The Indians would fall upon the fallen soldiers to take their scalps before we could reach them to offer aid. Dr. DeWolf was killed just as he arrived at the top of the slope. Had he moved forward only a few more steps, he would have lived. While following Captain Benteen back, I noticed several Indians running nearby. I raised my weapon to fire, thinking them to be hostiles approaching, but they were in fact our own scouts fleeing the primary engagement. They were in such a state of fear that they did not stop running until they had reached the Powder River, having quit Major Reno's command entirely. After giving the orders to Captain Benteen, I rode back to the ridgetop with his battalion, where we united with the remaining forces under Major Reno and McDougall. I could not rejoin my own company because the Indian forces now separated us from General Custer's position. When Major Reno moved out on the bluffs to engage the enemy, they attacked us, forcing a retreat and the hasty formation of skirmish lines. We suffered the loss of several men before we could fully establish our defense, and they were killed before we could retrieve them. The Indians kept up their fire on us throughout the day and through the night until the morning of the 26th. At dawn, they commenced shooting at us once again. We managed to kill a great number of them, though I cannot say how many exactly. With 68 wounded men in our camp and our access to water cut off, the situation was dire. It was agonizing to listen to the pleas of injured men desperate for water when we had none to give. Several men were shot while trying to fetch water, and they returned without any for the wounded. I remember with perfect clarity the very first cannon shot of the 2-day fight. It struck the earth nearby and passed just underneath my horse's belly. 2 officers, Lieutenants Harrington and Sturgis, along with 14 enlisted men, were never found. It was said that during the nighttime celebrations, the Indians had cut off their heads and dragged them around. On the hill, 56 men from our command were killed by the Indians. Gunfire persisted throughout the entire day of the 26th. By late evening, we observed the camp starting to move. The warriors kept shooting at us while the women worked to pack everything away. By the morning of the 27th, not one Indian remained in view. We brewed coffee, fetched water, and did everything possible to tend to the wounded. Around 10 o'clock, General Gibbon and his column arrived. He was accompanied by the overall commander, General Terry. We gave loud cheers when General Terry appeared. He wept openly, overcome with emotion. His subsequent report of seeing 200 soldiers in the valley below made us understand that General Custer and the 4 companies with him had been completely wiped out. Before that, we had held on to the hope that he might merely have been surrounded as we were. That afternoon on the 27th, I was allowed to accompany Captain Benteen to the battlefield and look around freely. As I moved among the dead, I identified several acquaintances and a sergeant I knew. Among the bodies I saw were Sergeants Finkel and Finley. Sergeant Finley lay at the head of his horse, Carlo, with 12 arrows sticking out of him. They had been lying in the sun for 2 days, bloody and torn apart. It was easy to tell which men had been wounded, as the women and young Indians had stripped them and repeatedly struck their faces with tomahawks or shot arrows into their bodies. They only ever mutilated those who were still alive, never those already dead. None of these bodies retained any clothing. The Indians had taken everything. They must also have gotten about $25,000 in cash from them, for we had been paid just before leaving Powder River Camp for this campaign, and there had been nothing to spend it on. I saw the place where the last of them fell. They were clustered in a small group. General Custer lay across several other men, only the small of his back touching the ground. He lay encircled by the dead. A bullet had passed cleanly through his heart. This last cluster of men was positioned near my captain, Tom Custer, the general's brother, and his brother-in-law, Lieutenant Calhoun, who led H Troop. The conflict involved approximately 4,000 warriors, and when including women and others, the total number of Native Americans gathered was between 12 and 15,000. Custer and his men faced a truly overwhelming force. After the defeat of Custer and his 4 companies, not one living soldier was left on the field to tell what happened. The sole surviving creature from the slaughter was Captain Kiowa's horse, Comanche. He was found with 7 bullet wounds. Alongside our fallen soldiers, many dead Indians were also discovered. About 75 Indians were inside 3 still-standing teepees, with no way to guess how many more had been carried away when the camp moved on. One Indian I came across was wrapped in buffalo robes and blankets. When I cut him free, I was shocked to find he had 4 women's scalps, 2 of which had long red hair attached on a string as long as my arm. The sight was so gruesome, I dropped the scalps at once. I had no desire to be caught holding such a disturbing trophy. After the battle, our dead were buried before the difficult work began of moving the wounded to the steamboat far to the west. The vessel had gone as far upriver as possible before having to withdraw to the Yellowstone River. A great many of the wounded soldiers were carried to the steamboat for care. Most of these injured men, against the odds, eventually recovered from their wounds. Among them was old Comanche, the only living thing to survive Custer's final fight. As a lasting memorial of that day, General Headquarters even issued an order that this horse should spend his remaining years in a box stall. A soldier from the 7th Cavalry Band was tasked with his care, and in dress parades Comanche was led at the front of the regiment, draped with a black mourning cloth. After the fight, the Indians simply took down their camp and moved on. My regiment, which had fought in the battle, was in no condition to pursue them. We were all too badly hurt, and our numbers too reduced to mount any counterattack. Having won a decisive victory, the Indians were able to withdraw without further loss. I trust this eyewitness account offers you a distinct perspective on the Battle of the Little Bighorn and the Great Sioux War of 1876.